Released in 1996, Kirby Superstar was proud about the amount of content it was packing. After a handful of entries, the pink puffball would feature in a project, offering him more than one exceptional game, but a colorful, multi-game package, as the American and European marketing would boast, a fun pack with 8 games in one. The Japanese box art would be even more flattering, a fine-edged paulownia wood packaging, a real-world cue comparing it to premium sake and dishware. More than ever before, quantity was at the forefront of its quality, a pretty out-there concept for a new game. Compilations were typically reserved for older games from mascots that already crafted a hefty catalog, but a compilation of new adventures served as a mainline entry was a pretty bold direction for a Nintendo mascot not even a half-decade into his lifespan. It's enough to make anyone question the actual purpose of the project. What exactly is 8 Kirby games in one meant to accomplish? Well, the answer was pretty special, to craft the most invigorating edition of 2D Kirby, but then proceed to show that its growth and potential couldn't be limited to a single game, but destined to generate a vigorous history for as long as it has the chance. And that to me is the real value of Superstar, not the literal sum of its parts, but its ongoing mission to find and bring out the best of a promising foundation. The way the game opens is very effective in selling this idea. The first available game in the set is a remake of Kirby's Dream Land, and it's impressive to see a lot of its breezy design from the Game Boy game kept in the cut, walking around, inhaling and spitting out whatever you see, and hovering about to the sky's limits, levels being a light stroll, enemies being lackadaisical. It's the classic act of vacuuming an innocent video game that still turns out to be as fun as it was on a budget handheld all these years later. But Spring Breeze makes an incredible addition to the classic tale. It doesn't feature the Kirby from the past with a limited moveset, but his latest incarnation in Superstar, who turns out to be an immensely gifted and ferocious action game star. Which is amazing! Kirby has now taken on this advanced fighting game slash beat 'em up syntax. Special attacks, combo strings, and even command grabs are now the touchstones of every potential power he can steal. And with such incredible ease to perform, tying attacks to Kirby's natural movement and single directional presses. An ingenious hybrid of 2 appealing sectors of Nintendo action, once thought to be distant. But here you get the depth and chaos of an action game with classic Kirby fundamentals. You can juggle a Waddle Dee to oblivion, you can go Swordmaster in the bubbly clouds, you can make a co-op partner at any time to join you in the havoc. These are all well and good features in a vacuum, but what puts them over the top here is the fact that they're unleashed in a game as innocent and breezy as this. Let me put it this way, if Kirby's Dream Lands let you beat a video game in 20 minutes, then Spring Breeze lets you eviscerate a video game in 20 minutes. And don't get me wrong, plowing through an easy game was always part of the original intention, but Spring Breeze as an opener to Superstar really goes out of its way to reflect on how much the character has grown by demonstrating how much he's outgrown the expectations of his older games, even leveling up from the standards of Kirby's Adventure with the advanced take on copyability combat here. It doesn't mean he can't find enjoyment out of reliving and obliterating that past, but it's clear that the past can no longer contain him. From the moment you destroy King DDD and make the credits roll at a ludicrous speed, you're made firmly aware that there's something much greater in store for this current Kirby. And that's when Superstar makes an attractive proposition. Why not just give you the brand new sequels to this title right on the spot? Dynablade and the Great Cave Offensive are the type of campaigns built with Superstar's depth in mind, but at the moment you unlock them, they're the immediate answers to your prayers after Spring Breeze. They have wider and trickier level design, they have cooler enemy and power variety, they up the ante from beating up a penguin punching bag to taking down massive figures by the goal, or surviving an elaborate expedition. Even the logos are sicker. It's cool to see this Kirby from a humble place get a marginal facelift when it mattered the most, adding new, glamorous ways to frame and bookend the journey. The traversable world map of Dynablade over the back-to-back structure, geographically outlining your new adventure, and functionally letting you replay levels and fight a mini-boss. The goal game bonuses at the end of every level, the opportunity to find hidden switches that give you access to storage rooms, featuring every ability in Superstar. The Great Cave Offensive has the longest and most hazardous set of levels in the entire game, with an added challenge to collect as many treasures as you can before reaching the end. It's divided into large areas with save rooms in their entrance and minecart tunnel transitions from one frontier to the next. The challenges and scope that both of these modes deliver are also great for letting this advanced combat system shine in a better light. You get to see that it's built for so much more than rampaging a naive game, but that its specialty is in its movement potential. With every ability, you're given a lot of options to attack an enemy, and some attacks deal more damage than others, but the core of the combat is about how efficiently you can move around your opponent. Attacks aren't just landed, but can also go through enemies and juggle them in the air. You're also not always in a flat arena. For the most part, combat is situated in Kirby's brand of craggy, aquarium-like level design. Hills, slopes, and the boundaries of your space become just as important to your combat approaches as your inputs. You can argue that levels are no longer as complex as they could be in a pure platformer, or that they've watered down the controls of a fighting game. But I think the areas that make both genres count, the attack and momentum potential, are still accounted for, and very well in this hybrid. Both the mindfulness of your surroundings as a platformer and the flow and options of combat meet in the middle for a wonderful marriage. It's the area that really captures the peak of 2D action on the Super Nintendo, and where I also feel that they properly advanced what they started in Adventure. That game had the room to experiment and the inventive patterns and encounters, but you could only sample the premise of a power against enemies that could be beaten in a pinch. But here you get more contentious encounters while also having the privilege of a power's entire score. It's an exciting metagame. You now have the tools to paint your own Kirby set pieces, different from how others would play it, and different than the last time you played it. It's a system so robust and well thought out that even something like real-time co-op becomes a more plausible reality here in comparison to most other Nintendo platformers. Side note, I really like how the method of generating a helper derives from the single-player mechanics. Kirby typically consumes his enemies, but here he has the option to spare them and turn them into a friend. Player 1 conceives Player 2 and lets them follow in their footsteps. You can even share health pickups between one another. It's a very affectionate little mode they made here. With the system getting a better spotlight, it also feels good to see the typical trials and story beats of a Kirby game get a growth spurt too. The entire Dynablade campaign is a build-up towards one boss fight, unraveling the mystery of this swift phoenix from the intro. Not a sandbag asking to get punched, but a massive figure that scales the screen, requiring airborne tactics and careful positioning. And with the defeat of this majesty, you're not rewarded with an immediate parade, but a reveal that the whole ordeal was a huge misunderstanding. Dynablade may have ruined the crops of Dreamland like King DDD, but it was all an effort to feed her children, and Kirby quickly acknowledges and reconciles this fact. It's a nice refresh of a typical Dreamland tale. It doesn't always have to be a passing hero that saves the day by beating up everyone, but that sometimes forgiveness by the goal can be salvaged, leading to a growth in your community, and a better showcase of your kindness as a hero. The Great Cave Offensive is a more completion-oriented mode, taxing more output out of Kirby, but it's also one of the most open takes on completion I've ever encountered. The basic challenge is reaching the end, and the parallel challenge is finding treasures, which can range from being out in the open to requiring some next-level tactics or tough obstacle clearing. But the important thing is that this portion of the game is entirely optional. It's all self-imposed, something you do if you want to try. I think it speaks to the openness of the game's challenge here, that you could go through it without ever collecting a single treasure, and that its largest area with the most complex and tedious sections is also entirely skippable. Anyone that gets plopped in a mode and environment like this with zero background would probably see no good reason to engage with its treachery, but posed as a challenging sequel to a promising start or the next successor in the set, it makes the challenge it presents more enticing. Even the wackiest of puzzles come across as totally doable now that you've had your foot in the gameplay at this point. Ultimately, you're not scolded or pressured for being incomplete. You're applauded for how much you've managed to do. You could have cut some corners in a run, but still earned a good amount of wealth when nothing about the game begged you to do so. The treasures you do end up getting feel more like trophies towards your personal best, and perhaps another run at the trek could get better and better, until at some point you're willing to go the extra mile and snatch it all. No matter how much or how little you come out with though, a round of Great Cave is always a circular journey. It's Kirby's biggest blunder as a hero yet, with the punchline being that you literally exit this rabbit hole the same way you came in. The only resolution being the amount of ludicrously expensive nonsense you've managed to snag along the way. A brag and a flex, no doubt, but also a candid reflection of your current relationship with the gameplay. It's this recreational vibe of the new games you get, the constant exposure to new sides of the gameplay and the mythology, no matter how small or grandiose, that makes Superstar so special, giving it a charm that could never have been captured in a typical linear format. It learns from one snapshot of success, and rather than forcing it to grow on its own, it builds an immediate resume out of it. It doesn't promise that every sequel will be a loaded masterpiece, but it promises to keep investing in what's there. See its potential through in more objectives, expose this Kirby to new environments and situations, decorate its interface, and in general, find more ways to make this promising basis shine. Even a game like Gourmet Race, while far from being an intense epic like the rest, is a perfect pit stop, a lighthearted flavor of challenge with this same gameplay style. Here you get an invaluable chance to play around with the speed and technique of Kirby. You get a special physics engine that jacks up his acceleration, and that exaggeration is what makes it so fun to study how the controls tick. What moves give Kirby minimal buffer, what are the best shortcuts of any given layout, and how certain powers become a lot more appealing in practice when given the room to be seen at their best. I've always loved time attack mode, so despite the brevity of its content here, I always spend an embarrassing amount of time beating my own records here. You also get a nice little redemption of King DDD, making a return here not for revenge, but simply simmering down as a chummy sports rival for Kirby. You can own him at his own playground game or be a good sport and give him the win. If Dynablade and the Great Cave Offensive were satisfying sequels, then Gourmet Race is a much-needed recess. Filler, but good filler. Pastimes like these are what Superstar proudly wears on its sleeve as its bigger narratives. Even the minier games that have absolutely nothing to do with the core gameplay are still given a proud billing alongside the main contents. No portrait of Kirby is taken for granted. It's a very wholesome way of capturing the essence of a character, getting sequels, and building a franchise. But it is a very delicate act that it's pulling. Instead of the buildup of time that makes a good sequel worth the wait, it's simply a localized unlockable here. And you could argue that because of that, the game is intentionally holding out on you, prohibiting you from playing the actual optimal parts of Superstar for something intentionally watered down. Like, if this game is so advanced in challenge and narrative, why can't it show its hand right away instead of wasting your time being a lesser form of itself? I'm not going to debate whether this is right or wrong, I just think that this is the kind of risk that comes with an avant-garde concept like this. You're either in favor of the message it's trying to convey, or you don't care for it at all. Personally, I think it's pretty worth it. It reminds me a lot of the same lesson I learned when playing Kirby's Dream Land. You may underestimate it for being an easy game with a fluffy look, but then you play it and find a lot to enjoy about it, both mechanically and aesthetically. And even when replaying Superstar and knowing that the juicier parts of the game are yet to come, I can still find a lot of enjoyment and even addiction in the game's more innocent corners. That's what makes the package so well-rounded. You get both better games and a better outlook on previous games. Superstar isn't a road to the best Kirby game ever, Superstar. It's a road trip where you get to learn to love this character in all possible facets that they've come up with here. Less like a Kirby timeline or collage or smorgasbord or whatever, and more like a community bulletin board popping in to see what's new for the day. Presentation goes a long way in selling this game as an exciting channel from top to bottom. The unique logos, title screens, cutscene art, user interfaces, and credit sequences. The game's being advertised as posters in the pinboard menu, the way that tutorials before the games play out like a prelude in a theater. The soundtrack also has a similar unraveling appeal. Good diversity, but all of that variety feels like it picks up immediately from the last classic Kirby track. Spring Breeze offers remixes of the Game Boy Dreamland tunes, and its sequels offer more intrepid themes, but still retain that same upbeat tone. These aren't just different tracks that branch away from Spring Breeze, they're sequel tracks to Spring Breeze, and I think that's an important distinction. From gameplay to aesthetics, Superstar doesn't reinvent, it wonderfully expands. The on-point creativity of these initial set of games is great in capturing how immense this one Kirby can be, and it's exactly what makes its last few offerings of original content such a captivating prospect. Revenge of Meta Knight speaks for itself, thrusting Kirby into a full-blown action thriller operation. The most enigmatic piece of Kirby lore thus far is now given the full spotlight as the head of a menacing warfare operation. And that makes for an amazing contrast. While the earlier games felt like natural extensions of the same neighborhood, this feels like an invasion of that comfort. The staging is a lot more intense. You now have a countdown timer on every level. The layouts are designed with more ammunition and traps. There's even a dramatic detour at the beginning where you get dumped into a typical Dreamland level, rushing your way to get back into heat. And the bosses are these infernal machines that often require a mastermind tactic to defeat. In other words, it's the perfect way to set up a story about apprehending a villain that wants to condemn your lazy lifestyle. You're effectively playing out a Kirby level and campaign in a space that heavily opposes and forbids it, and yet completely falls apart against its tenacity. Superstar's combat could appear pretty chaotic before, but this is the first time we're filled in narratively on its devastating impact. Meta Knight's crew expressing fear, anxiety, and even dark humor against every scheme of theirs you manage to foil and every part of the Halbert's craft you successfully destroy. It's not just the invincibility of Kirby speaking for itself this time around, it's about every bystander's response to it, outrageously vindicating that despite their ambitions, their loyal armies, intimidating strongholds, and pent-up ideologies, none of it means a thing versus a character so flippant about earning victories like Kirby. And that's where I think your progress throughout the game really gets put into perspective. You're not intimidated to enter this lion's den of a game because at this point you're a superstar celebrity, playing this mode as yet another marginal challenge in the roster, and while you're aware of your own strength, everybody else is flabbergasted at how far you can go. That's what makes getting to this point in Superstar's catalog so thrilling, what makes all of that earlier stuff so worthwhile to cherish, and what makes the potential to bust Meta Knight shit up so satisfying. In fact, the cut of Meta Knight's mask after beating him in a tense fight is no longer a surprising revelation that he's of a similar caliber to Kirby. It's now a solidified tradition, a Kirby custom, a humiliating defeat, where for a brief moment in time, you've brought Meta Knight down to your level. The final chase sequence where Meta Knight desperately hunts you down before his prized halberd takes a dive is also perfect. A cutthroat reminder that even when winning the rite of passage for the time being, your opponents will always find more ways to surpass you. In contrast to how Superstar promises the start of an exciting new adventure after your current one is finished, we get a darker perspective on that, where for every victory that Kirby achieves, there will always be a new threat awaiting him. More rites of passage to come. You can never truly escape the test of your worth. And unlike the bright-eyed victory screens that you've been gifted from every other game up to now, Kirby doesn't relish on this one. He drives away from what was a catastrophic defeat, a harsh outcome where forgiveness can't be salvaged. All in all, another passing job for Kirby as a hero, no matter the cost or collateral he may drive away from. But with that bittersweet ending comes the final original tale of Superstar, one that closes it up and makes for a fitting epilogue to the character. Milky Way wishes. A massive quarrel between the sun and the moon is affecting the day and night cycles of Dreamland, a problem so intensely out of the locals' control that Kirby is encouraged to think outside the box to make a difference. Build up strength by gathering star power from across other neighboring planets in the galaxy to summon a legendary wish-granting comet named Nova. Kirby here can no longer freely obtain copy abilities from every enemy he sees, but instead has to find deluxe copy essences in special locations to gain permanent access to them. The liberating gameplay loop of snatching whatever power you please is now reconfigured into a mode where you have to go out of your way to find the powers you want and become stronger. This being Superstar though, and not some adventure game where every discoverable ability is mandatory for progression, means that yet again, the process of growing Kirby is entirely up to your discretion. Find all the powers in the game to be the most optimal, or find as many or as little as you please, or work with none of these enhancements at all. The galaxy is your oyster, but you don't need each and every one of its pearls to be the hero at the end here. It's such a Kirby way to interpret an exploration game, treating it like an all-you-can-eat buffet. And hey, with the option to quick select whatever powers you collect on the fly, there is something vaguely close to real-time ability switching in Kirby. Not a very handy form of it, mind you, but I was able to pull off some rad style-switching feats here and there. Even at the last crumb of content at the edges of the galaxy, Superstar is always willing to let you overachieve. The only thing I guess you could mark down here is that levels do reuse themes from previous games. It's pretty clear that at this point they were running out of original steam. But at least I dig that you're getting some out there concepts for levels, like one entirely made out of lava, or a military base with a windy atmosphere, or one where you gotta change the seasons to progress. It feels more like remixes of older ideas, which I think is appropriate enough for the endgame. No matter how you shake it, you're being treated to an incredible resolution. Just as Nova gets summoned with all the star power you've collected, a rando named Mark swoops in and takes advantage of your efforts. This character, who kindly suggested this plot from the beginning, used it as a foil to become this power-hungry entity so he can firmly dominate the galaxy of Popstar. It sounds at first like a random development, but I think Superstar, with all of its variety, was pretty much building up to something as wicked as this. Just as much as Kirby can be pulled in all sorts of roles, villains can range from big dumb bullies to misunderstood creatures that need to be tamed two longtime rivals that want to get their comeuppance. Sometimes these villains can return as allies, and some might be awaiting their revenge in the foreseeable future. And if there was any other variation of antagonists to present in Superstar, it'd have to be the one that's the least suspecting. One that plays against the rules, using lies and deceit for his own gain. A figure with a sinister element of greed, going too far by getting jacked up with some shady magic he clearly hasn't earned. Nova's benevolent wishing powers don't discern friend or foe, so I think it's a cool twist to have peace be restored not through simply granting a wish, but by preventing an incoming malevolent one from being resolved. Kirby has gone all this way to seek help from Nova to stop the Sun and the Moon from fighting, but now even the Sun and the Moon are trying to prevent this disaster. And Kirby is in the middle of it all, a badass shoot-'em-up segment blasting its sci-fi innards. And once Nova gets neutralized, we have to take care of the one who got away. Marx is a sadistic boss, the way his face stretches, splits apart, and contorts with every attack. You can tell he's someone who's been hiding behind a facade for far longer than he's comfortable with. Someone who is desperately craving to have dangerous powers let loose on an innocent like this. In a way, it's kind of a morbid reflection of the versatile Kirby found in this game. He's a goddamn superhero. But you get to prove that Kirby's a real hero, founded by strength that has been honed and mastered over the course of several games and made possible by your victories. Unlike Adventure, where the Star Rod was the only way to fight the main villain, Milky Way Wishes stays true to its gimmick and lets you use any copy ability you've collected to craft your own final destination. It feels very resonant with the theme of this game and Superstar as a whole, that true power comes from those who genuinely search for and master it, not for those who selfishly abuse it on a whim. But as always, no matter what tools you choose to use, you prove through your personal defeat of Marx that the only worthy superstar of this galaxy is Kirby. Superstar begins with a typical day for Kirby, beating up local bad guys to make things right. Superstar ends with the destruction of an adamant wish-granting comet and a proper absolution between the sun, the moon, and all of the galaxy, both made possible by the same Kirby. But as we know by now, Kirby's adventures are never truly over, not even within Superstar itself. The final challenge of the game is a boss rush known as the Arena, one last gauntlet, making you fight every boss and mini-boss in a random order, up to Marx at the very end, all within a limited supply of health and the choice of a new loadout of copy essences each round. It's a pretty tense and climactic marathon when it's nothing but back-to-back combat, but one that is, as always, completely at the mercy of your configuration. Play with the best abilities, the worst abilities, mix and match, or don't use any at all. I know I sound like a broken record here, but I really gotta emphasize this again. Even at what is essentially bonus content, the secret 9th game in a presumed 8-game package, Superstar is always pushing the prospect of more. Talk about ending the game in a classic Kirby surplus and surprise. The value of Kirby Superstar stands for a pretty simple message. A scrapbook of your life isn't meant to be a perfect record, but an ongoing living. No matter how many sequels and spin-offs you get, no matter how many opportunities you gain to be the best you can be, the best of yourself is always yet to come. A message that has been with the series since the very first game. A deliberately easy game that surprised you with more. And then a console follow-up to that idea, where the choice of how the game and its difficulty played out could vary from one playthrough to the next. And here we get the idea in its loudest form, the literal embodiment of productivity. In a time when mascots were rushing to reboot themselves and shed their past, Superstar was a beautiful reminder that you could build upon your history and nurture where you started. A game about the thrill of immediately getting a sequel, which in turn alone meant getting more memories. I don't want to just say though that Kirby Superstar is the best Kirby game ever. I think judging the game based on whether it's better than what came before or if it's the last amazing one is kinda missing the point. I want to express instead that Kirby Superstar made me love Kirby as a body of work, one with a more than worthwhile history behind it and a bright future ahead of it. And, more personally, a game that always reminds me to keep going. To find more stylish games like it, of course, but to remember that your most ideal moments and toughest challenges in life are never the end of your story, but only the bookmarks of a long journey ahead. And anytime I feel like I've reached my limit, for better or for worse, I'm reminded of experiences like this. Because after all, being a superstar is far from being like a one-hit wonder, but a career that you can make last a lifetime.